years of democracy in Nigeria, and today is the day set aside to commemorate the achievement. Thank you for joining us on Business Morning. I am BC Adebayo. President Muhammadu Buhari, in his Democracy Day address to the nation this morning, touched on several achievements of his administration, especially with regards to the economy, and he is confident that the country is on the right track. President Buhari says his administration's objectives have remained to stabilize the macroeconomy, achieve agricultural and food security, ensure energy sufficiency in power and petroleum products, develop infrastructure, fight corruption, and improve governance. Let's take a listen.
On the economic front, our objectives have remained to stabilize the macroeconomy, achieve agricultural and food security, ensure energy sufficiency in power and petroleum products, develop infrastructure, fight corruption, and improve governance. We have witnessed 11 quarters of consecutive GDP growth since exiting recession. The GDP grew from 1.91% in 2018 to 2.27% in 2019, but declined to 1.87% in the first quarter of 2020 as a result of the decline in global economic activities due to COVID-19 pandemic. Every single economy in the world has suffered a decline. Ours has been relatively moderate. In order to stabilize the economy, the Monetary Authority took steps to build the external reserves, which resulted in improved liquidity in the foreign exchange market. The external reserves grew from $33.42 billion United States dollars on April 29, 2020, to about $36 billion United States dollars in May 2020, which is enough to finance 7 months of import commitments. Agriculture remains the key to our economic diversification strategy. The Presidential Fertilizer Initiative Program continues to deliver significant quantities of affordable and high-quality fertilizers to our farmers. This initiative has also revived 31 blending plants and created a significant number of direct and indirect jobs across the value chain. Government is also revamping the cotton, textile, and garment sector via a CBN Textile Revival Intervention Fund that would considerably reduce foreign exchange spent on cotton and other textile imports. Through the Food Security Initiative, we are promoting grow what you eat and eat what you grow. I am also delighted that more and more Nigerians are taking advantage of the opportunities in the agriculture and agri-business sector. I assure you that government will continue to support agriculture through the CBN Anchor Borrowers Program and similar schemes. To protect our farming investments, we have deployed 5,000 agro-rangers and employed 30,289 in our paramilitary agencies. We are also integrating rural communities to the formal economy by extending access to credit and inputs to rural farmers and building feeder roads. Our efforts on growing non-oil exports have started to yield some results. For instance, in the first year, our revenue from cocoa and sesame seed increased by $79.4 million United States dollars and $153 million United States dollars. Africa presents a huge opportunity for our export-based diversification, and we are developing our strategy to grow intra-Africa trade through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Nigeria has risen by 25 places on the World Bank's ease of doing business, ranking from 146 to 131st, and is now rated as one of the top 10 performing countries. This development is due to the visa on arrival policy, consistent promotion of initiatives that expand facilities available to micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises, robust electronic registration and payment system, seamless processing of business registration, and reduction of cost of registering business by 50%. We are confident that ongoing efforts will result in further improvement of this rating. We remain committed to expanding our mining sector. To this end, I have directed the resuscitation of the Ajaokuta steel plant based on government-to-government financing and a public-private sector financing. With foreign and domestic investments and the participation of small-scale miners, we are harnessing the supply value chain in gold production.
President of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari. Well, let's bring in the Chief Executive Officer of Carry Assets Management, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, to analyze the President's speech and, of course, some of the economic features of Nigeria's democracy in the last 21 years. Good morning, Mr. Chukwu. Thanks for joining us on the program. It's been 21 years after democracy in Nigeria, and the President is quite optimistic that the economy is on the right track. Do you agree with him?
Well, thank you, BC, for having me. Happy democracy to fellow Nigerians. I think if you look at that speech, there are some statements that the president made which are not arguable. I mean, they are statements of facts. When he said that you've seen an improvement in the export of agricultural products, if you look at the first quarter foreign trade report published by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, you observe that agricultural export in the first quarter of this year grew by 85%, despite the slowdown in overall foreign trade. We also saw a growth of about 60% in export of raw materials. So those are facts that are not disputable. In terms of overall GDP growth rate, the challenge we have is that the GDP is growing at a rate below the population growth rate. The president made a reference to investment in agriculture, anchor borrowers program. These are facts, like I said, these are beginning to manifest in the export of agricultural products. He was specific as it relates to some agricultural products that we are exporting, like sesame seeds, cashew nuts and processed cashew nuts, cocoa and cocoa processed seeds, and then you also have ginger. These are products we are actually ratcheting up our export capability. So those are facts, and they're not disputable. In terms of overall economic situation, our economy still remains precarious. Our GDP is still very weak at a GDP growth rate of 1.87% in the first quarter of this year. When you compare it to neighboring countries like Ghana, you actually observe that we're actually growing low. And I've actually taken the time to look at the overall performance of the economy in the past 21 years. Maybe we will look at that as we progress in this discussion.
Absolutely, Mr. Chukwu. Now, how would you assess the steps that have been taken by the Monetary Authority to stabilize the economy? Of course, part of what the president mentioned was the fact that there have been steps taken to build the external reserves, which resulted in improved liquidity in the foreign exchange market.
Well, this what I would say as it relates to the improvement in foreign reserve. You have to recognize that we just accessed $3.4 billion from IMF. If you add that to what we had, you will see that the increment we have in the overall reserve may be as a result of that, accessing that $3.4 billion from IMF. The key thing that you ask yourself, where did we get the funding or the increment from? If you look at the foreign trade I did mention earlier, in terms of import declined by about 21% and export declined by about 14% in the first quarter of this year. And again, we actually had a negative balance of trade, which means our total imports was higher than our total export, which means we actually have a deficit or an outflow of capital in the first quarter of this year from trade activities. Then if you look at the other components of the balance of payments, you look at investments. Are we getting a lot of foreign portfolio? Did we get a lot of foreign portfolio investment in the first quarter of this year? I think the answer is we got about $5.8 billion dollars in the first quarter of this year, total capital importation this year, first quarter of this year. But if you look at what could have left the country within that period, you will observe that we may also have had a negative in our investable trade balance. So I think the major boost we had in foreign reserve came from the $3.4 billion we assessed from IMF.
You talked about agriculture earlier. Of course, it remains key to the economic diversification strategy. But do you think that we have done well in this regard, especially in terms of achieving food security?
Well, we've not achieved food security. We're moving towards that. Achieving food security is not a light bulb effect. It's not something you achieve overnight. We are gradually itching up towards that. We've seen an improvement in rice cultivation and processing in the country. Today, we have several rice processing factories that can actually parboil the husk and the stone rice and make them very good for people to eat, unlike what we used to have, and Indian rice had a lot of stone. So we are moving towards food sufficiency, but it's not something you will achieve overnight. I think we are still importing a lot of rice, though the central bank will tell you we are not spending any money on importation. But we know we have several channels of payment in the country. Because if you go to several restaurants, you will see be served with foreign rice. So how did that come into the country? They were imported. So we're not yet self-sufficient in terms of rice production, but we are moving towards that. If we continue the direction we're going, maybe in the next couple of years, we will achieve that.
Now, if you say that we're still importing, large amounts of rice into the country, what about the issue of the closure of the land borders? Has that not have any major effect in curbing this?
Well, I did say that if you go to the restaurant, you get served foreign rice. I mean, they are not invisible. They came in through any of the borders, either they call it the sea borders or the land borders. But they are coming in. Maybe they are being smuggled in. The key thing is we're not producing enough. When we produce enough and we're producing enough quantity that our average cost of producing 50 kg of rice will be lower than the cost of importing that rice, then importation or smuggling of rice will cease naturally. These are economic factors that will push back on importation or smuggling of rice and other items that are smuggled into the country. The key element you must recognize that you must produce at a cost level that is lower than the cost of bringing those products into your country. Once you achieve that, nobody can compete with you in your local economy because they have to add the cost of shipping those products to your country. And in the case of, in this instance where the border is closed, they pay tariff to cross the border to smuggle those goods in. Those are barriers that will make it important for them to bring those rights in as long as once we begin to produce at a cost-efficient level that can compete globally.
Now, Mr. Chukwu, one of the things the president talked about was launching a fully digitized mineral rights management platform for quick processing of mineral rights application, digitization of records, and plugging revenue leakages. What would be your expectation from all of this?
Well, I can't wait for that to be launched and fully operational because a lot of the lost in solid minerals. I mean, it's the tough work going on in Katsina State, obviously coming from people who are mining solid minerals illegally. And they are beginning to arm some militants are driving away communities and security agencies. So once we have that digitalized and government can actually determine who is being allocated an acreage, the person is paying taxes, and the person is also provided some level of security to make sure they can actually execute their businesses safely, then we will begin to trap some of the revenues are lost. And we'll also push towards improvement in value chain on the solid minerals segment. In the area of cement, for instance, we have limestone, we are mining the limestone, and we are producing cement. Remember, a couple of years back, maybe 20, 30 years back, we were importing cement, but we always have limestone. So similarly, a lot of the solid minerals, if we have the appropriate legal framework, like what the president made mention of, then it's easy for us to track and trap those who have access to mine these products, and then we can also implement policies that will ensure that they also engage in some level of value improvement.
One other achievement the president talks about was the fact that Nigeria is conducting bidding process for 57 marginal oil fields for the first time in over 10 years. So that's to increase revenue and increase the participation of Nigerian companies in oil and exploration and the production business. But in your opinion, how much of an impact has this had on the oil and gas sector in terms of growing local content?
Well, what I would say is that we've seen a lot of shift in terms of who produces Nigerian oil, particularly at the exploration and production segment, that is the upstream segment of the oil and gas sector. We already have a couple of Nigerian producers that are producing several thousands of barrels on a daily basis. Unlike what we had in the previous couple of years back, where it was only the oil major that we are producing locally. I mean, I don't want to start mentioning names, but we know we have a number of our companies that are indigenously owned, that have actually upscaled from marginal field producers to oil prospecting mining leases, and they are now producing in large quantity. We have a Nigerian company that's actually managing some of the key infrastructure in that sector. I mean, one of the key infrastructure for transportation of crude. It previously used to be managed by one of the international oil companies. So we've seen a lot of domestication going in the oil and gas sector. The local content law has also helped, also in domesticating the oil services industry. And the sale of the 57 marginal fields, of course, a couple of them are still being disputed by, and some of them are in court. But let's even assume we have to sell the 57, like the DPR had mentioned. That will further democratize the process of ownership and investment by Nigerians in the upstream segment of the Nigerian oil and gas sector. Today, Nigerian operators dominate the downstream sector, but the foreign operators, international oil companies, still dominate the upstream segment. So gradually, some of these marginal field operators may scale up and bid for the oil mining leases that the federal government said they will only auction when they pass the petroleum industry bill.
Mr. Chukwu, let's talk now about power, which, according to the president, remains very key to meeting our industrial development aspirations. Now, how significant is this goal of the president to the economic growth?
Well, it is very key, and unfortunately, we've not really moved the needle a lot significantly since the advent of civilian government, including the current government. We've not moved the needle materially. We've seen situation where a lot of business operators are running on self-generated power. In my office, we have 2 generators. In my country home in the village, we have 2 generators. In the house in Lagos here, I have a generator. And these are inefficient power supply sources. And you realize that you really can't become an industrialized country if you do not have stable power supply. We cannot produce efficiently and compete with some of the products produced outside the country if we do not have efficient power supply. I did mention earlier that if we can produce rice at a cost level that are competitive, then we will automatically eliminate smuggling of the product. Similarly, if we don't have efficient power supply, we are not likely going to achieve that level of efficiency in production that we can produce and begin to export manufactured products to other countries in the world. Today, we've signed the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and that will open up the borders to goods manufactured in other parts of Africa to the Nigerian market. Unfortunately, if we don't scale up our power production and as well as other infrastructure, including transport infrastructure, we may unfortunately be at the receiving end of that African Continental Free Trade Agreement, because countries that can produce efficiently, like Rwanda, could have companies set up there, produce and export to Nigerian markets. While because we have the largest population in Africa, we should actually be a natural market for the production of goods and services and export to other African countries. So we need to improve on power supply. Like I said earlier, we've not moved the needle as it relates to power generation, power transportation, power transmission, and power distribution.
Many thanks, CEO of Carry Assets, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, for speaking with us on Business Morning. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Our next discussion will be centered around the digital economy and national productivity, but that's just in a moment when we return. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Now, let me mention that the CEO of Carry Asset Management, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, will still be returning to talk about the key highlights from the market perspective. But for now, in his Democracy Day speech, the President, Muhammadu Buhari, also stressed the significance of the digital economy, which continues to play a key role in the country's development agenda. And this brings to bear the need for governments, corporations, and individuals to key into this vision of the President, especially in this advent of COVID-19, where remote working is beginning to dictate business continuity plans. This is a conversation that the President and Chief Executive Officer of Digital Bridge Institute, Professor Mohammed Ajiya, will be joining us now to hold. Good morning and thank you for joining us, Professor. So the President, in his speech this morning, referenced the role that the digital economy plays in his developmental agenda. What are your views of this priority of the President?
Thank you and good morning. Morning to our team in viewers. Digital economy actually contributes a lot now to the GDP. The ICT sector contributed slightly above 14% of the GDP. We can understand that, if we look at what the President said, how the oil sector that is the determinant of the economy contributed less than, a very significant percentage to the GDP. So the ICT sector is actually going to contribute more and significantly contribute more to the GDP, meaning to say all services and then values will be in the future based on the ICT or technology or digital economy. When we say digital economy, we are actually talking to the technology, information and communication technology, that is the ICT. Basically, this technology is a combination, of sending information, dissemination of information, using the combinations of computing as well as telecommunication. This information could be pictorial, or textual, or whatever information you want to disseminate. So IT actually is, the acquisition, processing, and dissemination of, information using a combination of computing as well as telecommunications. This will significantly going to contribute significantly to the economy. In Nigeria, we are fortunate with the coming of the current Minister of Communication, who also is an expert and who helped us to secure, the presidential approval in adding more mandate to the Minister of Communication. And this new mandate is digital economy because of the importance of this new economy or new technology to the economy of the nation. The government is doing really hard to make sure that we have, harness this new technology, the digital economy. The COVID-19 pandemic have shown to us globally, that technology is the answer and solution to almost all services, that we do. So in doing that, actually, will contribute greatly to the GDP.
Now, where would you say we are in terms of capacity for digital structure across the public and the private sector?
Actually, this is one of the biggest problems. The skilled is not there. For example, the government have just said certain level of officers should work from home because of the pandemic. But you find out that a lot of these offices are not equipped with the necessary skills, and the tools to operate the digital economy. So the infrastructure is really the problem. And I'm happy to say also here that government is doing very well. With the coming of this government, I think the broadband penetration, which is the key, the backbone of the digital economy, is hovering just between 4% and 6%. As of now, we thank the management of the Nigerian Communications Commission, who work tirelessly under the able leadership of the present CEO, Professor Umar Garbat Ambata, and achieved broadband penetration of nearly 40%. This, we believed, will continue. So if we have the infrastructure everywhere, and people will queue in now to the digital economy, but we need to do a lot on the infrastructure. Not only infrastructure, but training and making sure that people are equipped with the skills and the tools necessary to conduct businesses and services digitally. And that is where institutions like the Digital Bridge Institute are established. The Digital Bridge Institute is 100% owned by the Nigerian Communication Commission, and the main mandate actually is to train, capacity, increase capacity in terms, of digital knowledge and digital skills. Government also is doing very well through the other agencies. I believe government have formed what is known as the National Software Think Tank. In these technologies, the new technology, it involves two things actually. The computing, you have the physical parts, the electronics, what we hold, in our hands. But those things cannot work until you put a software. And those softwares are things that you cannot virtually see. But the government is doing well, as I've said. They have set up the National Think Tank on Software, headed by our capable Chris Owaje, and they are doing a lot to domesticate software productions and things like that in Nigeria. I believed with all those efforts, the government is going to put all this infrastructure which is necessary and which is the backbone, actually, of the digital economy.
While the government actually puts all of that in place, now, with the outbreak of COVID-19, what have you noticed in the way corporates and public institutions have been affected?
It is an impact. Now, services have been disrupted, and in digital economy, companies that really turns towards digital operations, you find that they gain more. For example, the richest person in the world now is the person that owns Amazon, which is an e-commerce. So likewise here also locally, the e-commerce giants, Jumia and Konga, you see their businesses are going higher and higher rather than the others. So the key actually is going digital. And government, like I said, is trying to put things in place. And when we queue in and come onto this digital world, things will work. You can see a lot of people now embrace virtual meetings, virtual learning, e-government, e-commerce, e-learning. Virtually most schools now are doing what is known as e-learning, electronic learning. You stay in your home wherever you are and assess your teachers. And that is also what we are trying to do in Digital Bridge, to deploy as much infrastructure as possible. We are trying to deploy e-government facilities to most of our state governments, local governments, where services and business of government can be done electronically. Also train massively staff, and people in, getting skilled. Not only, local skills, but we are talking of global skills. Luckily now the federal government have accepted the IC3 as a measure for global, Nigeria literacy in digital economy. So we are, planning massively to train people to deploy, the digital skilled, which is globally accepted. In fact, in Digital Bridge, whatever course we do, we allow people to be certified, meaning to say that if they are certified globally, they can work anywhere, meaning to say people can be sourced, from here and work elsewhere around the globe. This is what we call, business process outsourcing. and it contributes a lot. I think at the end of first quarter of 2020, business process outsourcing contributed about 97 billion United States dollars into the global economy. Nigeria can harness this. Nigeria can also be a participant and can take chunk of this global economy.
We would like to thank you, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Digital Brain Institute, Professor Mohammed Ajiya, for speaking with us on Business Morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's now join Temple Ashaju for some of the key highlights of the market. Good morning, Temple.
Good morning, BC. Thank you so much. And of course, now let's throw it back to Mr. Johnson Chukwu, the Chief Executive of Cowrie Assets, who we just had a discussion with earlier. Mr. Johnson Chukwu, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Okay, we're trying to connect with Mr. Johnson Chukwu, but quickly let us look at how the market settled yesterday. Specifically, we got 0.13% performance yesterday in the market. And of course, if you look at the volume of transactions, was at 337.12 million units for a value of 3.40 billion naira. GT Bank in recent times has continued to contribute massively to the value, the turnover of the market. Now we know that this week, FBN Holdings concluded the sale of its 65% stake in FBN Insurance. And this is something that I think a lot of investors have actually been watching lately and wondering what is responsible really for this move. And that's something that we'll get Mr. Johnson Chukwu to talk to us about. Specifically, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, thank you for joining us on the program this morning again.
Thank you, Temple, for having me again.
Great. So talk us through the significance of this transaction of FBN Holdings, the sale of FBN Insurance, which used to be the second largest life insurance in the country. What basis did this particular financial institution sell that off?
Well, my take is that divestment was basically for the bank to remain true to its core area of business. As you know, FBN Holding has the commercial banking arm, the investment banking and asset management arm, the insurance arm, and the microfinance banking business. So if you take out the FBN Insurance, then you basically see the other subsidiaries are largely banking services. So I think what the bank wants to do is obviously optimize its cost and focus more on its area of core competence. But interestingly, when I looked at the institution they sold, it is not principally because that FBN Insurance is not doing well. Because if you look at their 2019 performance, FBN Insurance contributed about 10% of their profit and about 6% of their gross earnings, which means what they did was obviously to step out away from an area they have considered as no longer core to their operations.
So let's look at the fact that they sold out the insurance wing, but left the insurance brokerage firm or insurance broker firm. What is responsible for that decision? Do we know?
Well, Temple, a lot of banks have adopted what they call back assurance. And that back assurance simply means because the core business of banking involves a lot of insurance. So the insurance brokerage arm will be involved in placing those covers with reputable insurance companies, including Salam, which is what FBN Insurance may become known as. So the insurance brokerage will continue to complement the core business of banking because virtually all banking services require some level of cover. And that, since the bank could have been placing those covers with its own insurance company alone, the brokerage company will distribute those covers to several insurance companies that are reputable, that can handle those things. So I think it is still integral to what the core business of their banking.
But in the end, what will this translate to in terms of bottom line for this institution?
Well, I think if you look at what FBN Holding did, they just ended financial year, where their turnover, their top line was at the third highest in the country. They did a turnover of 626 billion naira, just behind Access Bank that did 666 billion and GT Bank that did, Zenith Bank that did 662 billion. So in terms of the top line, they are doing extremely well. They are the third highest gross earning income bank in the country. But in terms of profitability, they made about 84 billion in profit. And I think what they want to do is obviously further enhance their profitability. We've seen a lot of improvement in their operational efficiency, but there's still a lot of rooms that they need to improve further on operating costs. So by stepping out of FBN Insurance, I want to believe that the liquidity they realize from this will further go into their investment objectives. The bank is pushing towards fintech, and you know that will require a lot of investment, but that's where the competition will be. The competition is all about cost efficiency. It's going to be about leveraging on technology. And as you know, the bank has actually, bank's mobile application was voted as among the best in the country. So I believe they want to realize this fund. The money they will realize from this sale will further go into investment into areas like fintech, which are the growth sectors of the banking industry.
But do we have an idea of how much this transaction was worth?
Well, I don't have the figures, but if you consider the fact that FBN Insurance had a balance sheet of more than 100 billion naira, and an FBN Insurance had a shareholders fund of about 22 billion naira, which is above the new minimum capital requirement for composite insurance companies. So I want to believe that for the bank to have sold at this time, when that company is doing very well, they must have been offered what they make, an offer they could not afford to refuse. It must be something that was very attractive to them. Remember that Salman has been a co-investor in that company. Yeah. So for a co-investor to want to buy out the core investor simply means they must have seen some very strong opportunity, and they could only have sold if they got a very good consideration.
Mr. Chukwu, there are existing policy holders in FBN Insurance. There are also underwritten risks already. So between Salam Emerging Markets and FBN Holdings, who then bears these responsibilities now going forward?
Well, Salam Holdings, Emerging Market, will actually inherit all the assets and liabilities. They're going to be taking over a company with a balance sheet of 100 billion naira. Shareholders fund about 22 billion naira. So they will also inherit all the policies that have been written by FBN Insurance. Remember that Salam Holding is one of the biggest financial institutions in Africa. They are in about 44 countries in the world, about 33 countries in Africa, and they are leading in about 11 of those countries in Africa where they operate. So I don't think any policyholder in FBN Insurance will have any reason to worry, because the company is being transferred to an institution that is one of the strongest in Africa.
Mr. Chukwu, before I let you go, we know that a lot of banks have been streamlining their operations lately. I mean, GT Bank has done the same thing, sold off some of its other subsidiaries. You also had that of FCMB, which also did away with all of those subsidiaries. But of what benefit is streamlining of operations in the current style of markets that we are seeing, as opposed to universal banking style that we used to have before now?
Well, I think what some of the banks are doing is basically to focus on their core business area or core area of competence. I did mention earlier that by divesting from FBN Insurance, what FBN Holding is obviously doing is to focus on their areas of core competence, which is banking services. The other arms that will be left, but for the brokerage, insurance brokerage firm, are banking services. You have the commercial banking, that's FBN First Bank. Then you have the FBN Quest, which is a merchant banking arm and asset management business. Then you have the FBN Microfinance Bank. These are also the retail or the small scale focused banking services. So the bank will obviously want to focus on its core area of core competence, which is basically what GT Bank did around 2012, 2014, when they sold GT Assurance. Okay. And then they also sold GT Bank, GT Mortgage. So those companies we are not sold because they didn't have.
Yes. Mr. Johnson Chukwu, thank you so very much. Thank you so much for your insights on this particular transaction. We appreciate them. Mr. Johnson Chukwu is the Chief Executive of Cowrie Asset Management. This is back to you now.
Thanks, Tempo. Now, we'll be crossing over to London as well as get an outlook for the debt and currencies markets when we return shortly. Don't go away. Now, let's get details of today's business headlines coming from the UK with Juliana Olayinka, who's at our London studio. Good morning, Juliana. So the reality of the gloomy projections of the economy is beginning to bear its face. The Office for National Statistics reports that the UK's economy shrank by 20.4% in April. That, of course, is the largest monthly contraction on record. Which sectors are mostly hit?
Good morning, Bissy. Well, there was no sector that didn't feel the crunch of the pandemic. It's hit everywhere: pubs, education, shops, construction, manufacturing. I think economists, of course, weren't predicting a miracle or anticipating a miracle today, but I don't think they expected it to be as bad as 20%. I think the suggestion was it could be between 16 and 18%, but it's much worse than that. I think the biggest drop has taken place in construction. The output fell by 40%. Trade exports fell by £19.5 billion in April. Imports also fell by £18.1 billion in April. And of course, the list goes on and on and on. I think one of the major concerns that a lot of economists and definitely the opposition party here in Britain are having is just how Britain can pull itself out of this. If you look at statistics and data that's coming from the Eurozone and our continental partners, they don't seem to be doing as bad as Britain. France, Italy and Spain, who they typically measure the GDP against, haven't done so badly. And of course, we have the statistics from the OECD, which said that Britain is going to be the worst hit country in terms of economic output. They predict that this year, British GDP will fall by 15%. Now it seems that we're on course for that. We did have a couple of months ago some predictions by the Bank of England and the Office for National Budget Responsibility suggesting that the contraction and the recession that's about to hit Britain could be the worst that we've seen in 300 years. So it is pretty bad. And of course, one of the major reasons that we're having this fall in output is because we are the second highest nation hit in the world. Depending on the statistics that you read, we've lost about 45,000 people from COVID-19, just after America, and our lockdown is still in place. We went into lockdown late. We're coming out of lockdown much later than our European partners. So there are some concerns. Chancellor Rishi Sunak, as well as the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, will have to, scratch their heads together to find out just how Britain can recover. A lot of people are suggesting as well that Brits are the most coronaphobia nation in the world. So a lot of people are not going out. Only 7% of people are sending their children to school when millions should be in school at the moment. They're still so fearful. We do have shops and non-essential department stores opening on Monday, but will people go out to spend their money? That's a major concern. And believe it or not, we also have another issue which is coming for us, and that's Brexit. At the end of the year, we are leaving the EU formally. Boris Johnson said there will be no extension to the transition date at the end of the year. And we did have Carolyn Fairbairn. She is the chief exec of one of the biggest business lobby groups in Britain, which is the Confederation of British Industry. She said if there is no deal, signed between EU and Britain by the end of the summer, then it could be absolutely crippling for the British economy. So it's a big, big day in terms of British economic news, and a lot of people are still trying to wrap their heads around it, including me.
These are certainly not the best of times, Juliana. But Morrison's has been hit by a major protest vote against its pay policy for top executives, and more than a third of investors voted against the supermarket's pay policy at the company's annual shareholder meeting on Thursday. Tell us, what's their grouse?
Well, they're not happy with the amount of money that Morrison's want to pay in terms of pension contributions to its chief executive officer and its chief operation officer, which is David Potts and Trevor Steyn. Now, typically, how much money is given in your pension is about 5% of your wages for the normal workforce. But these two chaps are looking to get 24%, even though there was a rebellion yesterday and 38% or odd of people said that no, they don't agree with this amount. The majority did rule, and so the pension does appear to be going through, but it has raised a lot of red flags, not just amongst shareholders, but also with government corporate operations that do look into matters such as these. They believe it's way too much. And also as well, the government say that when it comes to pension payments, executives should be on the same par as their workforce. So they're wondering why this is triple the amount that their workforce will get. So shareholders were not happy about that, and they voiced their opinion yesterday. On top of that, Potts, who is the chief executive, last year he received a payment, a salary package of £4.2 million, which is still a lot considering that Morrison's is one of the big four supermarkets in the UK. But it's not the biggest, and it's really kind of on line with Tesco, their chief executive's pay. And he also received a bonus of 2.3 million. So considering we are in a pandemic and there are a lot of people on the breadline at the moment, they just feel that this pension payment raises a red flag and they want something to be done about it. So there will be another discussion with shareholders to see whether or not this 24% pension payout will go ahead.
Another news coming from the UK this morning, Juliana, is that air passengers have been urged not to take hand luggage on planes, all because of COVID-19. But the question is, will that really help?
I'm not certain whether or not that will really help, I'm afraid, Busy. I suppose that's one for the scientists, which is what Britain has been trying to follow. But they're doing their best as people are trying to or hoping that they will get a summer holiday. Britain do love their summer holidays, and they're still really keen to get out of the UK and get on the beaches of Spain or Greece or Italy. And if they are to do that, the Department for Transport is urging passengers to not take any hand luggage on the plane, that they should check in all of their luggage. They've also listed some other measures, which includes remaining in your seat as much as possible, washing your hands regularly and wearing face coverings, which I believe are the messages that they've been saying for the past 2 months.
We'll see how that goes, Juliana. Thanks, and we'll see you again later.
Thank you.
And it's back to Temple for a review of the debt and currencies market. Temple.
Thank you, BC. Well, quickly look at the unlisted securities market, which is the NASDO2C. They welcomed Nearest PLC to the platform yesterday, and that's a company that used to be on the Nigerian Stock Exchange before they got delisted, and now with the PLC structure, they will be on this platform. But then yesterday there was no trade, not so much of activity here, because again, retail transaction was what we saw across board. Transaction in terms of volume was actually less than 1 million, 0.1 million, just 3.27 million naira worth of transactions, and it was only one deal. A look at the debt and currency side of the market. We've got investors looking. It was bearish trading day actually yesterday across board, across the bonds, NTB, and of course the open market operations segment of the market. But if you look at the little interest that we saw at the bonds end of the market, it was more at the longer end of things in terms of the 2050 paper. But if you look at the 2021, there was some kind of decline, some kind of sell-off at this end, the shorter end of the curve. But this is the mid end of the curve. We saw a little bit of interest, and generally, we saw an advancement in the yields in terms of transactions yesterday in the market. For the fourth consecutive day, this side of the market, NTB continued to drag, just 9.02 billion naira, and the key interest was at the longer end of the curve as well. The June 2021 paper, which is more than 300 days ahead. Look at the open market operation side of things. It was more of sell-off yesterday. We saw investors, reducing their holdings this end. Only a few investors were able to regain some profits at this side of the market, which of course didn't really experience so much of interest yesterday. But perhaps with the 151 billion naira system liquidity that the market closed with yesterday, next week will be more promising, because investors and dealers across local banks will be interested in spreading this fund across different outlets in the financial markets.
Fingers crossed, Temple, and let's see how next week would be. And that's our program today. Thank you so much for watching. I am BC Adebayo. See you next time.